Welcome back. Well, we've made it to the 8th week of the Evangelism course, and I want to thank you for taking this journey with me. I want to wrap things up this week, this day, this whole course by touching on what is considered to be a pretty hot topic. It's one that almost always creates some serious discussion, some of it a bit contentious. That's the topic of numbers. As a church growth expert, I have often been accused that I'm only interested in the numbers, that that's what I talk about, it's what I'm most concerned about, etc. And I want you to know that I'm pretty much guilty as charged. Let me tell you why, by sharing some of the numbers that concern me the most. First, did you know that according to the Church Growth Institute, that 89% of all church members in the United States believe that the church exists to meet their needs and the needs of their family? That means 10% at best believe that the church exists to make disciples of Jesus Christ. That says a lot about why evangelism is in the state that it is in the United States. But that's not the only number I'm concerned about. And another number that you've heard in this course already is that 15% of Americans attended a worship service sometime this last weekend. That means 85% opted out. And speaking of 15%, only 15% of all first-time church visitors ever return to church. That means 85% visit your church and go, nah, not for me. And in my experience, in most of the churches that are small and are struggling with growth, that number is between 4 and 6%. 95% approximately of the folks who visit your church, most likely, never return. This number, that the average church size in America, in terms of average worship attendance, is less than 60. Or that 41 U.S. churches close their doors forever every single day. That's 150,000 churches every decade, which is problematic when you understand that there's only approximately 350,000 churches in America right now. This one is sort of killer. Less than 0.5% of mainline churches perform a significant number of baptism each year. And a significant number is 5. 0.5% at most. Ouch. You've heard that the fastest growing religion in North America is the Church of Nuns, people who are no longer claiming any religious affiliation, and that Christianity is losing adherents faster than ever before in the history. And 20% of U.S. Americans have no faith foundation whatsoever. That means they have no church experience, no synagogue experience, no experience in religion of any description. And the younger the person, the higher the percentage. This is the fastest growing demographic of all. Now, those are some of the numbers that I'm quite concerned about. Now, you need to know that I believe that numbers count. But as I said, there's always some pushback. Largely, I think that pushback comes because churches and pastors would rather live in denial than the reality. Because they'd rather not have to face and take responsibility for their lack of involvement in the gospel, the lack of involvement in the Great Commission. But numbers have always mattered. Numbers mattered in the New Testament. For instance, there were 12 apostles. There were 70 who were sent out. Jesus fed 5,000, and then later he fed 4,000. He fed them with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. There were 99 sheep that the Good Shepherd left behind. There were 153 fish caught in the nets. 120 attended the first prayer meeting in the book of Acts. There were 3,000 converts at the first Pentecost, followed by another 2,000 converts later on. 500 people saw the post-resurrected Jesus, and there were 144,000 sealed in the book of the Revelation. You see, the early church counted. They knew numbers were important. They knew numbers were important because each of those numbers is a person. And counting is important because it's the only way that we have to measure the church's effectiveness. Just try to imagine for a moment going to a board meeting, maybe your next board meeting coming up, and announce to the church that numbers don't matter and that you will no longer be counting the offerings, you'll no longer be balancing the checkbook, and you'll no longer be keeping the books. Ludicrous, huh? But by and large, that's what we do when it comes to the most important commodity that we've been charged with being stewards of. Disciples of Jesus Christ. More of them and better of them. And of course, the definition of a better disciple is one who's making more of them. It's fruit. Fruit that lasts. So, as you know, your final assignment is to write a paper on the effective evangelism in our culture today. But it won't be worth the paper that is printed on, presuming, of course, it ever gets printed, that if you and your church don't get serious about doing effective evangelism. And the only way you can tell if you're doing effective evangelism is to be effective in measuring it. Numbers count. They're the souls we've been entrusted to move, to touch, to inspire, to have conversations with, to share faith with, and to make disciples of. And the first measurable sign of that effectiveness is the number of baptisms your church is doing. So here's what I call my pocket list of numbers that every church leader should be tracking. There's 12 of them, and these numbers are those that really count. They give you a good measure on how healthy, how productive, how well your church is doing in terms of disciple making, both evangelism and making more disciples, or making better disciples as well as the effectiveness of your welcome into the community. So here we go. First, the number of new contacts that you've made today. Now, what that means, a new contact, you only get to count a new contact when you have exchanged contact information. You get to count it when you have a name, an address, or an email address, or a phone number, some way to reconnect. 5 a day is what we recommend that pastors be working towards. But how many new contacts have you made today? Second, how many faith-based conversations have you had with an unchurched person this week? Number 3, related to the first 2, is the number of baptisms that you've done this year. And I can assure you, if you are tracking and setting goals and moving forward on making new contacts every day and having faith-based conversations on a regular basis every week, this third one will pretty much take care of itself. That you will be doing baptisms, but that's the number you need to know. How many baptisms has your church done this year? Fourth, the number of first-time visitors that have visited this month. How many first-timers have shown up? The second one of that, or actually it's the fifth one total, is the number of first-time visitors who are members of your target audience, those whom you're specifically trying to reach, whether it's young adults or baby boomers or Gen X or whatever it is, the number of your target audience that visited first time this month. Sixth, the number of first-time visitors that returned this month. And seventh, of course, is the number of first-time visitors that match your target audience that returned this month. That will tell you how well you're doing in hospitality, how well you are reaching those who you say you're trying to reach. Eighth, average worship attendance for each service this week, if you have multiple services. The average worship attendance this week. 9, the average worship attendance for each service this week last year. Comparing this week to last week can be very demoralizing because maybe something's going on annually on the second week of February or the 14th week of March. Don't know how that works, but you get the idea. Compare it to last year. Number 10, the percentage of worshipers who are attending are involved in a small group. You can define small group however you want. What's the percentage of those folks who are involved in, if you will, adult discipleship? 11, the percentage of worshipers who are involved in hands-on ministry beyond the church. In other words, not serving communion, not teaching Sunday school, but who are actually out in the community involved doing ministry. And last, number 12, the finances. Notice this last. What is the per capita giving for the year? Per capita giving is take your total amount of offerings and divide them by your average worship attendance, and that will give you a per capita number. Track that number year by year, and you'll have a fairly good idea on the financial health of your congregation. The reality is, folks, you only grow by what you measure. If you'll attend to these measurements, if you'll set goals for each one, if you'll track them, you'll see measurable results. You see, because numbers count. If you're not counting, unfortunately, it's likely that your church will become one of those statistics sooner than later. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to future conversations and your feedback.